Welcome to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Netflix leading the FANG stocks out of the gate with earnings. Shares down right now after hours on subscriber growth in an otherwise strong quarter. Also, Ted Sarandos, the chief content officer, becoming co-CEO. We're going to talk more about that in a moment. Overall, stocks, though, snapping a two-day rally with investors continuing to rotate out of this year's top performers like technology and cyberspace in focus, with Russian hackers targeting companies working on COVID-19 vaccine development. This after a massive Twitter hack on the accounts of top political and tech leaders. The company saying the attackers got access to internal controls. Former Homeland Security Secretary Michael Chertoff told Bloomberg earlier that Twitter must ask itself two big questions.
Are they adequately double-checking the identity of the people posting on a regular basis? And also they need to get to the bottom of how it is that somebody on the inside was persuaded or tricked into turning over essentially the keys to the kingdom.
Meantime, Facebook is also doing some soul searching after the social network's latest diversity report showing the company is still struggling to recruit black engineers. We're going to hear more on that later this hour with Facebook's chief diversity officer, Maxine Williams. I spoke to her exclusively. She's now reporting directly to Sheryl Sandberg. Talked to her about that as well. Meantime, cases of COVID-19 continue to rise in western and southern states across the country. California reporting near record new cases and deaths. Florida, Arizona, Montana also seeing surges. And in Washington, the next round of stimulus relief could come as early as next week, according to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Earlier today, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi told Bloomberg the urgency of a stimulus package is real.
It's been 2 months. It's been 2 months. More people have died, more people have gone unemployed, and more people have been infected.
And now back to the markets. That includes especially Netflix shares still down sharply after hours. Abigail, what are you seeing?
When you add up everything that you were just talking about, the headlines from the day, the news, the commentary, a rocky day for the markets once again. But as you mentioned, breaking a two-day rally for the S&P 500. So stocks really couldn't get out of their own way today, ending near pairing the losses, truthfully, at the lows. The S&P 500 had been down far more, down closer to about 0.8%. The NASDAQ at one point down more than 1%. So again, ending off of the lows. But as you correctly identified, once again, big tech, a drag. That momentum trade that had worked for so many weeks, in fact, months out of the March low, really sputtering more recently. Some of the China stock weakness that we've seen recently seems to be linked to that, just too far, too fast. And relative, before talking about Netflix, on the day, there were some big earning movers. Bank of America to the downside, having a bad day after putting up a quarter where they beat estimates, but they did make a big loan reserve loss of about $5.1 billion. Importantly, their consumer unit profits down 98%. So you can see those shares responding poorly. On the other hand, Morgan Stanley put up a very strong quarter, huge trading. So that stock doing very well. Revenue up 21%, beating the best quarter ever, even in pandemic conditions. And then Johnson & Johnson, Emily, they actually were able to raise their outlook despite the pandemic. So a bit of a mixed bag for earnings, but overall a little bit of a down day for stocks.
Meantime, Netflix still down after hours. We're waiting for the call to start, and I'm told that we're going to hear much more about this decision to promote Ted Sarandos to co-CEO with Reed Hastings. He's been the chief content officer for a long time, the architect of their original content strategy, but investors really focusing on this subscriber forecast for the third quarter. They'd been expecting 5 million subscribers, Netflix forecasting 2.5 million subscribers, though they did sign up 10 million new subscribers in the last quarter, and of course had a big quarter the quarter before that as everyone was sheltering and has been sheltering in place. Abigail, what are you seeing as you dig in?
Well, you know, it was really messy right across the board. But I think your last point there really hits it on the head, because for that first quarter, they put up 15.8 million subscribers relative to the then expectation of far less. I think it was maybe 6 million, somewhere around that neighborhood. So a huge beat. But it looks like they pulled forward subscribers through this pandemic situation, because while subscribers for the second quarter did beat the official number, it missed the high end of the whisper number of 12 million. And that third quarter subscriber guidance of 2.5 million, as you mentioned, missing the official estimate plus the whisper number. So lots of weakness, investors not liking. And the big key there, shares really priced to perfection, up more than 100%, well, close to 100%, I should say, from the March low to the recent peak. That's the big question for all of these stocks, though, Emily, because we've gone so far so fast. And there is a chart in the terminal that I really love. I don't think we have enough time to show it, but it suggests that there could be some more pain ahead for a lot of these companies overall. Investors just snap them up way too quickly, and there you see it overextended. So there could be some weakness ahead that will bleed right into the major averages, Emily.
All right, we got your chart, and Abigail, thank you so much for highlighting that for us, something to talk about as these tech earnings continue to roll out. Thank you. Meantime, talking more about Netflix, we've got Tuna Amobi with us, who covers Netflix for CFRA. Tuna, got to ask you first off, what's your take on this news of Ted Sarandos now sharing that top job with Reed Hastings?
Good afternoon, Emily. So I was a little surprised. I didn't see that one coming, but as I thought about it, I know that succession planning has been one of the questions that investors have started to ask about the potential departure of Reed Hastings. And when you look at the announcement today, I think it definitely communicates that that Ted Sarandos is going to be the guy to step right in. I mean, he's been there from day one, and as you alluded to, he's the architect of the original content strategy. He's got very deep relationships in the Hollywood community, very well regarded on Wall Street. So all in all, I think this is a positive, development. And I might also add that Ted continues to keep his role as Chief Content Officer, which is going to be very crucial as they continue to expand and deepen their content relationships.
I'm told that Reed and Ted, this basically formalizes how they have already been working together up to this point, and that they will be talking about this, giving some more context on the earnings call about to happen. So we'll be listening in on that. Meantime, what's your take on these subscriber numbers? A strong second quarter, but a light forecast for the third quarter. To Abigail's point, have they pulled forward some subscribers that might have come later in the year because people have been so dependent on Netflix as they shelter in place?
Right. So we knew the pull forward, theory was always going to be a factor for Q3, and we saw that play out in the guidance that they provided today, well below the expectations. That being said, I think Netflix, if anything, tends to err on the conservative side. So we would not be surprised at all if they significantly beat those expectations. With that being said, I think what the pandemic has done is to kind of recalibrate the streaming landscape, where we actually believe that Netflix has consolidated its early mover position by virtue of its all of the advantages in the content pipeline and the tailwinds. And now as we kind of look at how the streaming wars are playing out with the new entrants launching without some of their highest profile shows, Netflix, on the other hand, I think consolidated its position. There's really nothing that changes our long-term thesis for the stock. What we're seeing today is more or less the same type of volatility that we have been accustomed to if you followed Netflix for any length of time.
Meantime, let's talk about the new frontiers of Netflix. They really are global. I mean, the biggest opportunities for growth are going to be international. And as the pandemic continues to play out, I mean, certainly not all countries are in the same position. We're still in a difficult position here in the United States. You're seeing a resurgence in Asia. Where are you expecting Netflix to grow in key markets outside of the United States?
Right. So I think we're seeing the international market is kind of it has a very huge runway. I think this first half numbers since they started to provide the regional breakdown, you're seeing traction around the world. But what gets us even more excited is the fact that they're now in the early stages of launching this mobile-only, plans around some of the Asian markets, and that seems to be gaining some traction. They're trying to expand their addressable market. And when you look at internationally, I think the secular dynamics of broadband penetration are still way, way too early. So there's a lot of runway there. But even domestically, where I think most investors seem to, have thought a saturation has set in, we're seeing now, the impact of, COVID-19 and the subscriber addition domestically in first half, actually well ahead of expectations. So I would not even count domestic out at this point, even as much of the focus remains on the international markets.
All right, Tuna Amobi of CFRA. We're going to continue to watch these Netflix headlines as they cross and listen in to the call coming up. Thanks so much for your thoughts. Meantime, coming up, hacking into the companies working on COVID-19 vaccine development. We're told Russians are behind this latest attack on UK and US research. We'll discuss how they got their hands on it coming up. This is Bloomberg. The U.S., the U.K. and Canada are accusing Russian intelligence of trying to steal coronavirus vaccine research. This, according to the British National Cybersecurity Centre. Vaccine and therapeutic sectors in multiple countries have been targeted. British authorities saying the group responsible for the hack is known as Cozy Bear and is almost certainly part of Russian state intelligence. To discuss, we are joined by Nicole Egan of Darktrace, the co-founder and chief strategy officer there. Nicole, thank you so much for joining us. So what is your analysis of what exactly happened here?
As you stated, the intelligence communities have gotten together. They issued warnings originally in May that they saw early signs of this type of activity, and now they've confirmed it, and they have made attribution. As you said, they're known as Cozy Bear. They're known in cyber circles as APT 29 as well. We've seen this group before, so this isn't the first time. We actually saw them. This is the same group with the DNC, with the Pentagon, with some other government type of hacks in the past. And I think what's really interesting is trying to get at the heart of, what are they after? Clearly, the U.S. and our allies have spent in the billions of dollars already towards vaccine research. So there's clearly a lot at stake financially, economically, and of course, about saving lives.
So that was my next question. How vulnerable is this information given that it's something everybody wants, and how can it be protected?
Yeah, I think there's two aspects of what people could be after. And the first one is actually around the intellectual property. So that's the actual research itself about the approaches and techniques that could be used for these vaccines. But the other type of data that is equally important, and again, we don't know if this specifically has been hacked or targeted yet, is the underlying patient data. The data that would actually come from things like the antivirus test sets, the COVID swab test, even some genetic testing that's been going on. And that would actually, of course, say who has and who doesn't have, COVID. The reason that set could be really, really valuable is AI simulations can be run if someone has access to that patient level data. And those AI simulations could speed up some other country's ability maybe to get the vaccine sooner. But the downside risk is if citizens lose trust that patient level data isn't protected, would that disincentivize them to go and get tested, right? Because now that data could be at risk. So I think, that those are the two streams people could be after, the research data itself or the underlying patient data to run these AI simulations on.
Now, this group, Cozy Bear, that is supposedly behind this is normally a pretty low-profile group. They're normally sort of gathering intelligence, not doing something this high profile, if you will. You've got the Kremlin denying these accusations, saying Russia has nothing to do with the attempts, according to a spokesperson. Do you believe that? We've talked many times, attribution is always really quite difficult. I think as there's not all of the facts haven't been released yet.
But I guess the techniques that were used in the specific malware was very similar to the malware techniques and advanced malware techniques that have been used by Cozy Bear in the past. But likely the intelligence community probably has other information, maybe even beyond cyber information, to verify those facts. We don't have all of that information. It's been a bit scarce so far.
All right, I do want to move on to the great Twitter hack, certainly the highest profile hack that I can remember in my 10 years covering Twitter. You had the accounts of President Obama, Vice President Biden, Bezos, Musk, Gates, all hacked at once. Twitter now saying that it doesn't appear that any employees' passwords were compromised, but that somehow these hackers got access to Twitter's internal controls. What does it appear to you that happened here?
As you referred to, the speed and sophistication of this attack was unprecedented, right? It just, the fact that so many tweets were coming out from these high-profile accounts, and by the way, these accounts were considered protected accounts from a security perspective. They had ticked the box that said two-factor authentication, was required to be able to tweet out from those accounts. So they're known as verified accounts. So it is absolutely clear that internal employee tools were compromised and were used, in the hack. And it was also very interesting in terms of the response. This occurred simultaneously over about a 2-hour period of time, but also we did see Twitter, for I think the first time ever, actually disable those verified accounts so that no additional tweets could come out. We also saw here the use of Bitcoin, right? What the tweets were actually asking for is saying that these high-profile individuals wanted to give back to community and that they would either match or double any donations made to this same Bitcoin account.
Let's talk about the Bitcoin tie-in here because, this is, as you alluded to, now become a fairly sophisticated cryptocurrency scam. These folks racked up more than $100,000 within a matter of minutes. What does that say to you in terms of attribution?
Well, in terms of Bitcoin, we've actually seen during the global pandemic, Bitcoin attacks be on the rise again, not necessarily at the same profile of this one, but we have seen a rise again in Bitcoin usage and attacks, including in the rise of ransomware. But I think here what we also saw is the money moved in and out of these accounts, very quickly. So there definitely was a level of sophistication. But I think what's also interesting is, as much as that is a significant amount of money in a very short time, the other thing we're not sure yet is, are the private or direct messages of these high-profile individuals, has that also been compromised? Because imagine the money that you could get on the dark web if those direct messages or private messages are now for sale. So that could be a next wave that we may see in days to come.
Now, days to come, we've got a huge and very high-profile U.S. election coming up that was undermined in 2016 via social media. So how much confidence does this give you about the integrity of the election and Twitter's ability to prevent dis and misinformation if they can't even prevent a hack like this?
I think this will, of course, increase concerns. And as always, I think we always have to make sure that we have a way to verify information. And there are so many people that rely on Twitter as a source of news, as a source of information, and especially in the lead up to the election. I mean, we can only imagine if something this fast moving at this speed and scale happens as we get close to election day, right? Whether that information told people to stay away from the polls or disseminate other misinformation. So it does absolutely raise more concerns.
So what can and should Twitter be doing to protect its network at this point? I mean, you had folks on Twitter posting screenshots of what appeared to be Twitter's internal controls.
This clearly, it's very hard because when you have an attack on the internal controls, people are very worried about, is it insider threat? Was it that potentially employees could have been bribed? Is it that it was just sophisticated and they took over the internal controls? So I think what it always means is really pay attention to insider threat, really pay attention to those internal systems and who has access to them. And as always, it's a reminder that internal controls and two-factor authentication, nothing is enough. It does go back to the need to be able to have layers and layers and layers of security.
So now that we are in this moment, all sheltering in place, so many people working from home, what are your biggest concerns about the threats in cyberspace? You've got super sensitive information being hacked about COVID-19 research, and now so much more of American businesses and American business happening on these networks outside of the company and potentially vulnerable.
Absolutely. You know, it's one thing when we're all sitting inside corporations or corporate headquarters and our security controls and our security policies are being followed. As people are connecting to clouds or connecting to corporate networks from their kitchen tables, that security bar goes way down. And also, I think people start using new tools, right? We rely on things like Zoom and other video conferencing and collaboration tools that we weren't using at the levels we were before. So the traditional security tools that used to keep us safe really don't work as effectively in these dynamic environments. So I think it really does come about raising the level of security all the way to what's called, you know, the endpoint, making sure that we can have that same level of visibility. And I will say things like artificial intelligence that can really understand our new patterns. You know, how are we connecting to this information? Where are we connecting from? And that AI hopefully can keep us all a bit more safe.
Do you have more concerns about Twitter than you do potentially with Facebook, which was the subject of the, main, certainly compromised network in 2016? Do you think that Facebook has built up its defenses enough? I mean, they've talked so much about how much they have been investing, but do you believe that Facebook is just as vulnerable as Twitter is today, despite perhaps these investments, given that the hackers are always one step ahead?
I think we always have to remember that social media, as much as it's so broadly used and relied on, is still in its early stages in terms of these massive platforms, social media platforms. And as you said, the attackers always seem to be one step ahead. So we have to keep investing in very advanced techniques. We can't pretend to know what that attack is going to look like. And I think that's what a lot of the downfall of the legacy approaches are. Remember, a lot of the legacy approaches rely on knowing the past attack and thinking it's going to look the same the next time. And I think what we see over and over again is now we've seen the attackers get more creative. We've seen them use a new technique they hadn't used before. And going back to why I think artificial intelligence is so important, it doesn't predicate on needing to know the last attack. And so we need to keep investing in more advanced ways to stay a step ahead.
What are those advanced ways?
So some of those advanced ways are really understanding normal behavior. There likely was something different in the usage. For example, you talked about how all of a sudden simultaneously, all these high-profile accounts started tweeting out the same information to the same Bitcoin link. The artificial intelligence could actually see that pattern in split seconds and have it alerted and stop that, right? So it's looking for those unusual patterns. Wow, this has never happened this way before. Maybe we should stop this from happening. So I think when you're looking at the massive amounts of data and users and accounts that are on these social media platforms, there's no way people alone can keep it safe.
All right, Nicole Egan, the co-founder of Darktrace, thank you so much. Obviously, huge day in cyberspace today with this Russian hack on COVID-19 vaccine research and the great Twitter hack as well. We'll, of course, continue to follow these themes. Meantime, Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook, has been talking with Dr. Anthony Fauci via Facebook Live. Let's take a quick listen to some of what they've had to say.
We really got to almost regroup, call a timeout, not necessarily lock down again, but say, we've got to do this in a more measured way. If we don't do that, Mark, we're going to wind up getting a situation where in other states, we may be seeing the same thing.
Well, Doctor, I strongly agree that we need somewhat of a reset here. All the opportunity to reassess what we've learned and to change course going forward. And, I know I try to do that personally. And I hope that we as a
Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. One issue that has been front and center in Silicon Valley is the need to increase diversity at tech companies across the board. Facebook has been struggling to increase black representation at the company, especially in technical roles, not increasing that representation by a single percentage point since they first started reporting diversity numbers in 2014. This as Facebook also faces an ad boycott and pressure from civil rights leaders. I spoke with Facebook's Chief Diversity Officer, Maxine Williams, in an exclusive interview about their latest diversity numbers and challenges ahead.
In the same time period, what you'll have seen is that we've been able to increase women in technical roles from 15 to 24%. We've been able to increase women in non-technical roles to the point where they're the majority now at 58%. And even black people in non-technical roles has moved from 2 to 9% in the same period. Hispanic to 11%. But in technical roles, black and Hispanic people, these numbers have been stubborn to move. So we've taken this multi-pronged approach where we have short, medium, and long-term strategies to drive the representation. And representation is not just to say we have the numbers, right? The point is, the reason we want more representation there is because we want to build products that can serve this very diverse world. So for us, it's a top priority and one we've really invested in, and we're just gonna keep doing it. I mean, we had a civil rights report come out recently, which they worked with us for 2 years. And the reason we invited them is because we wanted to get to excellence, right? You don't invite an audit in order to get accolades. You invite an audit to see where do we need to do better. And one of the things in the section on diversity and inclusion is that the auditors said, you all have been innovative. And I think that's a good thing, because if we look at corporate America, we don't see as much progress as we should for as long as people have been working and investing in diversity and inclusion. And so we're trying to be innovative. We're doing a number of different strategies. Some of it is to be more consistent. When we do find things that work, we keep at it, we tweak, we enhance. And what we're hoping is that that will deliver more results, better results. And if we keep being innovative, we will perhaps discover things and be able to act on them to see more progress.
Meantime, you have civil rights leaders saying you're not doing enough to stop hate. You have advertisers who are boycotting. You have your own employees walking out because of how Facebook has handled President Trump's posts. Is Facebook's public reputation and brand right now making it more difficult for you to recruit diverse candidates?
The interesting thing is that we also do not want any hate on our platform. Hate is not good for us. Most of the people who use, the 3 billion people who use our platforms, they're doing it to connect with people that they love, to do things that they're interested in, and it's all goodness. And then at this scale, there is some hate. And we have every incentive to reduce that, and we have. So over this time, we've greatly reduced the amount of hate that people see before they even see it. We've developed systems. We have thousands of people working in this. And again, this is an area that we're just going to keep, because it is in our interest for it to come down. So as you say, it's in our interest for people to want to work here, to see the value. And so what we hope is that recruits will see how impactful the company is, how valuable it is in people's lives to connect with the people who they care about the most, and will come and help us to build the things. Human beings are complex characters. And like I said, most of our interactions together are positive. And then there are times where human beings interact with each other in a way that's not at all. And we want people to help us to reduce that.
So given all of the issues that Facebook is facing right now, do you worry that some of these reputation issues are going to impact your ability to make progress? We see you making progress on women, but you're not making progress in the Black community, at least in those technical roles.
What I actually hope is that being transparent about where we need to make progress will help us to make more progress, because now we will be clear about the areas that we need to do better, and the people who want to help us do that will join, and the people who are already here, right? Because this is not just about bringing people in, it's about who's already in our workforce and how are they experiencing it and how are they able to contribute. So one of the things that has come out of both the civil rights audit and ongoing work we've been doing is that we're now really looking at how we structure more opportunities for people inside the company to have more voice in what we do. Those are incredible opportunities for people given what we do in the world and the impact it has. And so while there are challenges, I think being transparent about them will in fact help us make more progress.
In the civil rights audit, the auditors say that they are deeply concerned with how Facebook has handled President Trump's posts. You have a president who has threatened violence on the American people, specifically protesters in the Black Lives Matter movement. Now that you are at the executive table with Mark Zuckerberg, you're reporting directly to Sheryl, what is your voice in the room saying about how they should handle these issues?
Yeah, I mean, we have a really robust content policy team that does most of the evaluations and then escalate things. Being in the room means, look, I come from a background where I'm a lawyer whose majority of my practice was representing trade unions. I ran a human rights organization. My training, like the training of most people in the diversity and inclusion field, is looking at the marginalized people at the center. Right? Most of the times, that's why you have the word marginalized. They're at the margins. But for us, they're the center. And so looking at things from that lens allows us to bring a different perspective. So me being in the room allows us to have a different perspective to consider, right? How are these things going to impact these groups that are vulnerable? We have a very sort of collaborative, robust debate culture. And me being there at all times, consistently in all the meetings, helps us to have that not just on an ad hoc basis, but on an ongoing basis, looking from the POV, from the point of view of those that in some systems that are based on imbalances of power, usually have a detriment to these marginalized groups.
The critics say that this is a failure of leadership. And I know that Mark and Sheryl repeatedly say these things are important to them, but are they important enough to them? Are they making diversity enough of a priority?
Absolutely, 100%.
Where's the proof?
Oh, the proof is in the investment. Absolutely. Look, I'm like 117 years old. So I've worked in a lot of places. I've worked in different industries, and I have never worked in a place where I've had this much leadership driving this. Leadership saying, we need to do even more. We need to do it faster. We need to do it better. Leadership saying, what are the resources that we need to do this? We will apply those. This is not a failure of leadership, a failure of what we would call buy-in, right? You would hear that term a lot in this space. Do we have buy-in from the top? We have the buy-in from the top. Absolutely. These are complex issues. And that is where you will see that even we ourselves get frustrated at not being able to make more progress. They're complex, they're networked, they involve a lot of how society has developed. And as you try to unpack that, it's just hard work. But it's work that we are committed to be doing for the long term.
Talk to me about that frustration, because there are so many issues happening about Facebook, outside of Facebook, that you can't necessarily control. And this has to be making your job harder as someone who has been working on this for 7 years and clearly wants to make progress and is in some areas, but not in others, which are very important.
Emily, I think when you go into this line of business, you know that it's going to be hard. You're probably going into it knowing that there'll never be a day that you plant a victory flag and say, mission accomplished. I've worked on criminal justice reform, death penalty issues, prison reform. None of these, as I said, workers' rights, right? None of these are things that you ever wake up one day and say, okay, we've done it, check that box. So yes, it is hard work, but it is such valuable work. So when you go into this, you sort of go in with your eyes open and you're going to be keeping at it. And what you're looking for is progress. And there are many, many more people way before me who have done much more and carried much heavier burdens, who keep working at it, who keep pushing at it. And that's what we have to do. We want things to be better. for more people in the world.
Mark Zuckerberg has been really out front on remote work, and Facebook is working to shift tens of thousands of employees potentially to work from home permanently. And I wonder if this could be an opportunity when it comes to making progress on diversity, because the talent can live or come from anywhere.
Absolutely. And we're hoping for that. And we're being deliberate about it, right? So it's not just a hope. We're designing it. And that's why we're being thoughtful about it, because we want to put inclusion at the center. We're hoping that the way we design it can unlock more talent in cities where before we might not have been as successful. It is quite an ask to ask somebody to move from their community, their family, their neighborhood, their church, all of the things that give us that sense of self and belonging and where we feel connected, to move from there in order to come and do the work that we would like them to do. So if we can go to them, we are hoping that can unlock much more diversity in terms of the people we're able to recruit and retain.
How are you talking to your kids about race in this moment?
Oh, it is challenging because you're trying to balance being realistic with them with not making them afraid of people in the world. So we bake it into everything we do in the household. We don't have sort of conversations apart from them. We include them, but again, trying to say to them that people are generally good, but you do have to be wary. Unfortunately, we have to say to them, if you engage with law enforcement as Black boys, you probably need to be to take a particular posture if you want to come out of that alive. It is difficult. We have, said to them, if you get lost, where you go for help, that's something that you sort of have to be conscious of. It is not easy. It's not easy because you want to do the balance because, like most people, I think I want them to look to law enforcement as the people who help us keep safe because they do. They do. It's again, this issue of scale. It's interesting because we began our conversation there, right? Most people are good. And then you have some that aren't. And how do you navigate that space and that world? And how do your objective is to get it to 100% goodness, 100% no hate. Will you ever get there? Probably not. But will you keep working towards that? Absolutely. And so even with my children, I try to strike that balance.
So on that note, and this is my last question, do you think if Facebook is able to make more progress on diversity, to hire more Black workers, to hire more women, as you have been, do you think some of the decisions will be different? Do you think the product will be different? Because we know that the research shows that, diverse teams produce better products, better results, make more money, and all of that. And I wonder if you think it will change the way that Facebook works.
It will change the way anywhere works. That is literally the whole game. That is why you do D&I. At least that's why we do D&I. Is because we know that with different perspectives, you will do different things. It's all about, what do you have in that mix? What are the ingredients in there? And so what you want is to have it on every single team so that what we decide to do, how we decide to build it, how we roll it out, how we market it, all of that becomes different when you have different ingredients. Now, sometimes you might end up with the same outcome, of course, because it doesn't mean that, the different voice is always the right voice. That's not the point. The point is to have considered. It reduces vulnerabilities and it increases the opportunity for developing things which connect with people when we consider the perspectives of all of the people. So absolutely, that's the game. That's why we're in it.
Facebook's Chief Diversity Officer, Maxine Williams there. All right, coming up, TikTok continues to be under fire with growing U.S. security concerns over the app's harvesting of U.S. data. We're going to hear from an early investor in TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, next. This is Bloomberg. Meantime, big U.S. tech companies facing major antitrust issues continuing in Europe. Earlier, the EU Commissioner Didier Reynders was on earlier today on Bloomberg talking about some of these issues. Take a listen to that conversation.
I've started a discussion with my US colleagues at the beginning of my mandate at the Commission level. I was in December last year in Washington to discuss with the Attorney General William Barr, and it was the beginning of a discussion about the way forward. Yesterday, again, I've had the Trade Secretary Wilbur Ross on phone, and we'll have a new phone call tomorrow to see how it's possible to react together. Because it's very clear, I said that it's a binding decision, so we need to apply the decision of the court, and we need to discuss with our US colleagues to see what are the best possibilities that we have to give a full application of the decision. But you know, it's a huge decision, so we need first to analyze in detail the decision. It's not just after some hours that it's possible to say all about the content of the decision. It's a very important document.
So, I mean, this affects over 5,000 companies that have to send data through the U.S. and the EU. It obviously isn't going to be resolved overnight. So what is the U.S. supposed to do as a plan B?
But there are different elements. First of all, I said we have a validation of all the tools. So the Privacy Shield was not the only one tool to exchange data. And so hopefully it's possible to continue to work with the standard contractual clauses, but there are also other instruments inside different groups. I'm thinking about the binding corporate rules. And so it's possible to use different tools. With the US, what is possible to do? But to see how it's possible to give an answer to the court and to maybe organize a better data protection, because I'm in charge of the full respect of fundamental rights for the EU citizens in Europe, but also abroad. And we need to be sure that the protection then that we are given to the citizens about their personal data is traveling with the data. If you exchange data at the EU level, of course, you have the GDPR, the protection of the general regulation on the data protection. But if you exchange with the third countries out of the European Union, we need to be sure that we have the same level of protection. So we need to analyze with the US colleagues what is possible to do to have maybe a better level of protection for the personal data coming from Europe in full compliance with the decisions of the court.
It's fine, fine. Didi Reinders there, the EU Commissioner for Justice. Meantime, TikTok has become one of the world's most popular apps, serving up a steady beat of lip-syncing videos and viral memes. But backlash against the company's parent company, ByteDance, continues to grow over privacy concerns and the company's connection to China. Joining us now, Hans Tung, managing partner at GGV Capital and an early investor in ByteDance, as well as companies like Airbnb, Peloton, and Slack. So, Hans, obviously TikTok has been under fire over the last couple of days, especially what do you make of the concerns that many people across the United States and cybersecurity experts now seem to have about the company harvesting Americans' data?
I think these days, any company that has any connection with China are under intense scrutiny. So that's just a fact of life. We're living in an increasingly very polarized world with the two biggest economies, the governments at odds with each other. So it is definitely a complex and evolving situation that we continue to monitor. You look at what TikTok has done. We were early investing in Musical.ly, as you know, and ByteDance acquired Musical.ly in 2017, and hence will become a shareholder in ByteDance as well. And look, the TikTok's team, what they have done and what they have grown the business to worldwide is quite impressive. And at the same time, you also see them working very hard to have most of their top executives being based in the U.S. Hired Kevin from Disney to be the chief executive officer, and have more and more team being based in the U.S. and try to comply with local laws here in the U.S. And so you see that making a very strong effort to make themselves more global and more U.S. friendly.
Kevin Mayer, as you mentioned, the newly appointed CEO of TikTok. That said, you've got India banning TikTok, President Trump mulling a ban on TikTok, Wells Fargo banning its employees from having TikTok on their phones. You know, is there a security risk? Do you believe, as a U.S.-based investor, there is a risk?
I think that these days the issue is that if you have server in China, people worry, period. And that's and how do you solve that? And the best way to try to move data, make that more localized, try to have more teams based in local countries you're operating in. There are a number of things that people are trying to do. It's just not a TikTok issue. Any company today that's connected with China in some way or the other are trying to do that. And that's just a fact of life we're in. The framework that people use to look at these multinational companies have shifted in the last year, and then companies are scrambling to make adjustments, and they're adapting, and we encourage them to adapt as well.
Now, you obviously invest a lot in China, a lot cross-border. This as tensions between the U.S. and China continue to ratchet up. You have Hong Kong special status revoked. Is that changing anything about how you do business across the borders right now?
Yeah, we are, as you know, a very global fund. We have offices here in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, with presence in New York, and then our roots are from Silicon Valley and Singapore. And we became early investor in Asia, specifically China, with our investment in Alibaba in 2003. And so we do have localized teams that operate across these geographies. We have close to 300 portfolio companies. Many of them are span across geographies such as U.S., China, and then India and Southeast Asia, and even Latin America. And we're just close investment in Europe, even though it has been unannounced. So we're a global fund like a TCV, like a Tiger Global, like a DST, that understand that the world's increasingly volatile, but we have to make investments and work with our founders to scale their business and do what's right for our LPs. And we try to navigate through these complex situations as much as we can and track them as closely as we can. What we do see is that the lessons from China and US, the lessons that are brought about by urbanization and adoption of mobile internet technology and services are driving superior returns. Today, we made an announcement to launch the GGV Digital Economy Index. We track 91 companies, their performance over the last 10 years. And as a group, on an equal weighting basis, we treat each stock equally with $1 share, $1 in each one of them. It delivered over 50% return year on year over the last 5 years, over 30% return over the last 10 years, where it's performing 20, 30% better than NASDAQ. And so we know that by investing globally and having perspective and data points globally, that allows us to understand how internet adoption of internet technology and mobile internet, mobile smartphones are really changing the way people live and businesses are being done, and efficiency is being generated. So that's what we focus on as venture capitalists.
Meantime, you have continued pushback on this new national security law that's been imposed on Hong Kong by Beijing. And I wonder how you think this tension is going to impact tech innovation in China and Hong Kong, which, you know, certainly has been quite competitive and certainly competitive to companies in the United States. Will it change the way that innovation plays out?
Yeah, well, you and I have both been to Hong Kong multiple times before. I lived there twice in the 90s and then 2000s. And I have friends who are different sides of the issues you just mentioned. So it is definitely complex and it is not easy. And we're watching how other multinational companies like the Microsofts, the Google, and the investment banks of the world are dealing with that situation. We do hope that, and we do know from past experiences that when countries are more open, and the visas don't have a lot of restrictions on them, you have the best talent that want to go to the best cities, best clusters in the world to innovate. That's why you see Silicon Valley thriving.
Right.
As someone who grew up going to Stanford, there for 4 years for college, it's just mind-boggling how the changes that could happen. And since we invest in Asia and see what has happened to Shenzhen and Shanghai and Beijing, so many jobs got created because companies are doing the right things to increase efficiency in the economy. These are things that we miss and treasure, and we hope that there's a way for the government to resolve the differences and allow innovations continue to happen. Will be good for mankind.
Meantime, Hans, we have just a minute left. GGV is launching a new digital economy index and insights report tracking global public companies. Talk to us about why this is so important.
Right. Over 25 years ago, it was a book written on digital economy, and that seminal book back in the early days of the internet, right after Netscape came out, influenced a lot of the way founders look at what the world could be with internet being a key driving force. And fast forward today, especially during COVID-19, the adoption of mobile internet technology is unprecedented. You have a lot of baby boomers, people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, using Apple Pay, using DoorDash, ordering grocery delivery from Instacart. And I just had an interview with Max Levchin, who is the co-founder of PayPal, now CEO of a GGV portfolio, a firm. He mentioned his own mother changing the behavior and using a mobile payment wallet now. And those are the stories and anecdotes and trends that we thrive on, and we want to make sure people are aware of it.
Hans, we'll have to leave it there. We'll be following that report. Hans Tung of GGV, thank you so much for joining us. More of Bloomberg Television after this quick break. That does it for us today.